Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Ahmad Fahmy. We talked about living in different cultures, the difference between being loved and being liked, and living like a lion.
I'm Ivanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello, hello everyone, and hello with me I have Ahmad. Is that how I should pronounce your name?
Yes, that's actually really good. Thanks.
And with me here, let's show a little bit on where we are. Oops, and this is where I am indeed in Ghent in Belgium. And let's bring you, and you are in Istanbul, if I'm correct. And so we're moving directly to Istanbul. And I'll bring you back on screen again. Oops,
I'm on the Asian side of Istanbul.
you're on the Asian side. Well, yeah, I don't want to know the exact locations. I'm trying not to put stalkers and helping stalkers to do the exact. But yeah, that's
I mean, yeah,
yeah. But I assumed
I don't think,
it's
yeah, I don't think saying Asia is gonna result in any stalkers. But I'm in Istanbul is between Europe and Asia, so
and
I'm on the
yeah,
Asian side.
exactly. And yeah, and in October 2023, I was there. We visited, yeah, with a company I was working for. We were there, and then yeah, it was really nice visiting the city. And
Fantastic.
well,
It's a
actually, we
wonderful
did
city.
a lot. Yeah, it's a wonderful city, and actually with a lot of history. It's really interesting to see the whole history of this of yeah, well, that city and how things moved over the years and things like that.
It's incredible,
Ah,
yeah.
Ahmed, for the few people that don't know you, could you, before we jump into the questions, just introduce yourself a little bit? What do you want people to know about you?
So I'm like many of you, a coach. Live in Istanbul with my family. Been here for 8 years. Before that, London for 11 years, and was born and raised in the U.S. I started as a developer pre 2000, the pre 2000 boom. So I got to ride that whole late 90s boom and bust cycle. Was a developer, if you know back then. So I think we're around the same age. So followed the developer, dev manager, project manager, program manager. Then around 2006, discovered different ways of working, uh, and worked in the company I was in, helping transform that company. And around 10 years ago, I went independent. So left the company I was with, went independent, and I've been doing it independently for the past decade or so. And we were just talking. That's actually when I met you for the first time, when I went independent, and authored some patterns like team self-design, some other things like that, Gamba sprint, behavior stories, that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's me in 2 minutes.
Trying to figure out the exact um, year when, with one of the very first classes of less that was given in Belgium by Quick Larman at that moment.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's really hard to figure out the exact time. Probably should have it somewhere, but that will lead us too far to get
Exactly.
that. But it shows a little bit on yeah, our history and yeah, how long things like less already existing, because it's sometimes people don't always understand that it's getting a lot more attention the last couple of years, but it existed already for yeah, quite a while.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and yeah,
I mean, when I was
it's
first
yeah.
exposed to it, it wasn't even called less. It was
Mm.
how Craig scaled Scrum, basically Craig and Boss. It wasn't yet labeled anything. It was just a set of thinking tools and patterns. And so
Yeah,
I got to kind of see the genesis from a collection of ideas, and this is and their best practices to them trying to grow a method and a movement, etc. So it's been fascinating to kind of watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, I was working well with the in the class we were there with Jurgen De Smet actually, with who I
Yeah,
was working in 2010 using exactly these ideas that came from the two books that Craig and Bas had published at that time. And yeah, like you said, there was no name. They actually tried not to have a scaling framework.
exactly.
And but okay, the history then showed that others tried to do it, so they had to come up with a name in a way to help them get more attention to this. So yeah, really interesting times, like you say. Let's move into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
I think the majority of people uh, probably don't know that we've homeschooled our children, and that has really influenced how I think about behavior change and how I think about um, influencing people, and taking ownership of your children's education and getting them to behave in ways you want them to behave, and them not behaving in those ways, and everyone being so unique and so different, and you taking full accountability of that. That's really influenced how I see behavior change and see um, even the nature of our work. So that's been hugely influential. And then the probably the other thing is living for long, significant periods of time in different countries. So as I mentioned, I was born and raised in the U.S. I lived in London. Now I live in Istanbul, and I'm not Turkish originally. My parents are Egyptian, and so being steeped in three separate cultures has really taught me that culture really matters, and you can't come with your own set of beliefs and ideas and try to impose them on a different area. You need to really understand where the context in which you operate in. And so I think the combination of those two things, and I can go, of course, there's so many different things that have influenced who I am and how I am and how I think, but those have really changed, and both have really humbled me. So someone once told me, if you want to really understand that you have no control, have children. So, so
Yeah,
and then on top of it, if you take, like I said, take ownership of trying to educate them, and then the responsibility, you can't blame the school that your kid isn't doing well. And then again, layering on top of that, living in for long periods of time in cultures that are not your own, those have shaped and the way I think, and really humbled me in what I do.
yeah, it's yeah, just yeah, everything you say there in that one phrase about children, you learn so much looking at our worldview. At least my worldview changed completely once I started having children when they grew up. All the things I don't like about myself, I see in them, and
Exactly.
luckily the vice versa sometimes as well. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's a lot of these things, the mirror that they show,
yeah,
and like you say, it's very easy and tempting to blame other people, like school, like people around us, but all in all, yeah, it doesn't help, where it's much easier to take responsibility and see, yeah, that's yeah,
yeah.
I really like that.
No, I appreciate it.
um
Yeah.
and so could you give an example of how that some of these influences?
The I'll start with the second one, then I'll get to the what the children have taught me. But
Mhm.
the when I went from the US to the UK, and my formative years are in the US, and my formative work years are in the US. So I started working full time when I was like early 19. So my education happened in an investment bank, as a developer in the investment bank. And I was what they would say, like, I was a high flyer. I would say not a great developer, but I was very effective without being technically very, very great, you know. But I was very, very good in terms of delivering business value through shitty code. And I would be the first to tell you I wasn't the best developer. I was more of a hacker than a software engineer. But suffice it to say, I was successful in my career. I was considered high potential. And I took those behaviors, those characteristics, those things that made me successful, and then I moved to London uh, in my 20s. Same bank, same department, different culture. Where I was a high flyer in the US, I was like the bottom of the barrel in the UK. And I didn't understand what was valued. I didn't understand how to communicate. I didn't understand the communication style. I didn't understand what was valued in London. Yes, they're two countries, same companies, same language, although the English would argue that Americans don't speak English, but the culture was so different. Um, and this is even within, the overall same bank, the cultures were very different. So I found myself being so highly regarded in the US and not highly regarded in the UK. And that was a huge shock for me. It was the first time I was the opposite of a superstar. And then I had to learn that the behaviors that I brought that made me successful in one wasn't going to make me successful in the UK. Even the dressing style, even back then, I used to wear my BlackBerry on a holster in my belt. That's what we did in the US, and then that was like laughable in the UK. And so, or for example, the mode of discussion, it's much more aggressive and in your face in the UK, the battle of ideas. So my feelings would actually get hurt. Whereas in the US, it's much nicer on the surface and how you communicate. And so that really taught me early on that you really need to understand the context in which you're in before you come with a preconceived set of ideas. And so if I have a standard toolkit, a standard set of mental models on how to help transform an organization, I need to understand what's the region I'm working in, whether it's uh, Cairo, Chicago, Riyadh, um, London. I really need to understand before I attempt to change. And same thing with moving to Istanbul. Very, very different culture. And sometimes being American, you think everyone's American. Everyone speaks American, everyone eats American, everyone is American. And that sort of hubris and arrogance I had to unlearn or I did unlearn in my early 20s. And so I am much better at learning the context I'm in as opposed to imposing my mental model in the organization I go to. So that's what being in different cultures, and then it really just humbles you to live in different areas, try to speak Turkish, for example. I am not a native Turkish speaker, and then it humbles you and gives you huge empathy for those who go and learn English, for example. And so I think those are probably the two resounding lessons I learned from living in these three countries for long periods of time, is not to impose my mental model, but instead seek to understand the culture and the context I'm in, and start with a air of humbleness, not arrogance.
Yeah, I recognize a lot of what you say, both about learning myself or working with different cultures, and being seen by Americans that just think that everybody speaks English, don't understand that, yeah, it's when people speak broken English, it actually means that it's their second or their third or their fourth language. And that
Exactly.
actually, yeah, is a lot more different than, I recognize that. And for me, being a non-native English speaker, I actually noticed that for me, it's easier to work with people who are also non-native English speakers, in the sense that we use easier language, and we understand that the other person might not understand all the languages, where people from the UK or from the US typically use much harder English to use, and they all understand the different kind of contexts and the different specialities about a certain word versus another word where I might just not know. And then they assume that I know it. And that, that is sometimes hard.
Yeah, and it's even beyond just the language or using big words, you know. It's references to American shows and American
Oh,
foods and
oh yeah, let's not even
and
start. Yeah, that's true.
and so yeah, so living outside of the US for now 17, 18 years, you begin to see that. You begin to, like, for example, I'm in awe of the fact that you're conducting this in such wonderful English. Like I can't imagine doing this in Turkish, you know, or even Arabic, that my parents' native tongue. And so
Mhm.
again, living outside for so long, you really, again, you become very humbled by it. You know, I am far less arrogant than that 23-year-old kid that went to London, you know, who thought he knew things, you know. And so that's probably had a huge influence on how I coach and the spirit in which I coach, and how I come to an organization. You know, like, for example, I just had my first gig in Riyadh this year. And
Mm.
before I did anything or said anything, I asked a lot around the local culture, and I observed a lot. And so I didn't want to bring some of my, again, mental models or cognitive biases into that gig. And there was so much sort of beauty I saw. You know, once you learn to look, and once you develop the eyes to see, and then once come in with this air of humbleness, you, you become much more effective, and then you win over through us, but of course you have to do this authentically. You win over the client because they see you're trying to really understand and to empathize. And so that's been hugely valuable.
Yeah, yeah, I recognize so much. And when you started adding, like, okay, there's the culture and the other things, like, I still remember, I don't know what year it was, but a conversation among coaches where they were referencing Goldilocks, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And at first I thought it was some agile reference, then I gradually learned, no, it's actually a children's book, but there's actually
Yeah.
lessons to learn. And I was like, whoa, okay, that was,
Yeah.
and people didn't even realize. And these are people who were very much aware about culture and different kind of things, because I'm talking about, really, not going to mention the name because it looks like I'm shaming them, but these are really, like, agile coaches, and that I really look up to. And it took me like 4 or 5 minutes to realize, like, oh, they're talking about something I'm missing, and then I needed to ask some more. And yeah, that was, then they did very graciously and explained a lot. But yeah, it was just, yeah,
Yeah.
mind-blowing that there was some kind of thing that they all talked about very easily, because it was so much in the culture of, yeah, of them growing up and being talked about. And it looked like, oh, this is a nice reference to use in coaching. And that's true if you're from the US, or at least if you're from the US where you have learned about that book. And yeah, that's,
Yeah.
are lovely, lovely stories, and lovely, I think, really important indeed when we talk about, well, especially with the more and more remote that we're working, and working with people from different kind of countries. What does it actually mean, that culture difference?
Yeah.
um that's really, really important, and I can really imagine that, how that can have a big influence if you start to learn that at a very young age. Because if you're 19, 20, and you learn about these things, that's tremendously. And yeah, usually it takes a lot more years before people start to realize that. So that's really nice.
100%. Like I just this reminds me, I was once doing like a long-term gig in India, Pune, India, like months, collectively months spending in Pune, India. And I remember thinking, like, I would turn on the TV at night because I usually be mentally drained after the day, and I'd be turning on the TV, and of course your natural thing is to look for something, or to search on YouTube for something you want to watch, or Netflix. And I remembered turning on the local news in India in Pune, and there was like this big controversy, and I sat there just watching it was in English. I was watching the local controversy, really trying to understand, then Googling, and then what happened, and I went down a huge rabbit hole around that particular controversy. And I went the next day after a multi-hour rabbit hole of trying to understand the local controversy around this one actor running, like basically he's on trial for running into somebody. Who's this actor? Why is he so famous? What? And then I started like watching YouTube clips of his movies and things like that. And then the next day I went to the office and I was like telling them and asking them questions. And they were so amazed and so happy that I spent so much time to genuinely trying to understand. And it goes to, and I know you're going to ask me at one point about books. It really goes to like my favorite book. I'm going to just jump and I'll stop. How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's a terrible named book, but if you truly try to empathize and understand, it really helps you win over your audience, or maybe a nicer way to build genuine trust, which is what we try to do as a coach. And so,
well, let's bring the book on. We'll talk in the section. We can talk about another book because I know you have two books that you wanted to talk about. So this is the book that you mentioned, right?
yeah.
That's indeed, I've read it. I have no idea anymore when, years and years ago. But yeah, now that because I've been thinking in preparing for this, I was like, what again was in the book? But like you just mentioned, there's so much in there. Like, okay, if you want to, well, make friends or win friends, how he calls it, it's really first to start understanding them before you can actually want them to understand you, of course.
I think by the way, I have my kids read this book, all of them, because it's over, I think it's over 100 years old now, but it was, some consider the original self-help book. But
Indeed.
very few books have shaped the way I think like that particular book. Maybe because I read it when I was really young, and it's one of the few books I read multiple times. And sort of the lasting, most enduring lesson is that, for me at least, is to truly try to understand the person in front of you. And it cannot be fake. That's the hard part. It cannot be, hey, tell me about yourself, tell me about your family. And what I discovered is, the reality is, I don't find everything about everyone interesting. It's just, but everyone has something that's interesting. Everyone has something interesting. That's the thing I'm looking, or at least interesting to me. Let me put that. I remember I was coaching in New Jersey, and as a coach, when you're brought in, some people just have an allergic reaction to you. Just the nature of what we do. Just this external person, they just decide they don't like you. And this was one of those situations where somebody decided he didn't like me, and so I remember asking him, like, tell me about yourself. And even he resisted that. And I kept on asking him until he told me he was the Texas two-step champion, which is a kind of dance I'd never heard of. And I just was actually intrigued. What's a two-step? How do you become champion? What is this? And I just found myself asking him a lot about himself and asking him about a lot about that particular thing. And so if that's the trick for me, is that it has to be authentic, and I have to find the thing I find interesting about that person. And once you get them really talking about themselves and lowering their guard, something they're genuinely passionate about, and then you have to be really interested in that thing. Once you find that equation, like, magic happens. There's a genuine human connection. And that's the beauty of this book. To me, it's about how do you create genuine, authentic human connections. And so even if somebody hates me, or just decides I don't like this guy, I know that there's something or some things that I will find incredibly interesting about that person. It's just now my job to fish it out and find it. And the other thing that was really enduring from that book is that people don't care about you. Everybody to a large extent is self-centered. They care about themselves, their story. Even if you tell them something, your story, they're going to look at it from the lens of their story. And so I need to spend as little time talking about myself as possible, and the majority of my time learning about that person. And even little tiny things like knowing their name. And like, for example, it meant a lot to me that you said my name correctly, and that's one of the ideas in that book. People love the sound of their own name. So you took the time to learn my name and how to say it properly. That happens very rarely in my life. People usually say it wrong. And so that makes you endearing to me. That makes me care. And so that book has had again a lasting impact on how I view people, and realizing I'm not the star of the show. Like, even though we're external coaches, we're brought in, we feel like we need to be the stars of the show. If we actually make ourselves the star of the show, we fail. If you make everyone else a star and you're in the background, just like a movie producer or a movie director, then you succeed.
Really like that. It's yeah, there's I should have written down more, but there's so many things that you said that that resonate a bell with me. But so yeah, asking, and this is why I'm asking people on camera about the pronunciation of their name. Um, Even if that means I might sometimes do it wrong, but they can teach me on camera, because I want to show well, authentically, that it's important to learn that and to take that time and to do that, and that other people can really realize, oh, the name should be pronounced this or that. I think that's really, really important to do that. We really have to take the time. For me, this is yeah. Again, here with this podcast, I try to listen and bring in these things, and yeah, I don't know. Tomorrow I'll publish 154, and half of probably only one third of the people I knew before, and I've made so many connections with people, and yeah, I've learned about so many interesting people and so many interesting things that for me it's like wow, and it's all about indeed asking questions to find something more, like, okay, tell this. What I did notice somehow, and not per se in this podcast, but more at work, is that sometimes I run into people that don't like me asking questions about them. They're like, oh, at work, I don't want to talk to anything, not even past experiences of work, not even private things. This is the job, and I've run into problems like that. That I really was
Yeah.
genuinely interested in a person, and the others like, no, you're coming too close. Have you ever run into that, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, of course. I remember when I first moved to London. Uh, one thing that I like is I like to invite people over for dinner, and I think to myself, okay, I spend more time with these people than with my own family. So once you come over for dinner, and then this British guy told me, we're about 10 years too soon before that. Like, that's too soon. Like, coming over to your house for dinner, maybe in a decade. And so I asked him a decade later, and he said, no, it's still too soon. And so in that case, I try to respect their boundaries. I don't know if it's a cultural thing, a personal thing. I have seen that. I generally respect it, but sometimes I don't give up either. And some people, I just like, they have a spark and I like them, and I like, in one coaching engagement in Chicago, this person just did not like me. I still remember the first thing she told me. She told me, "How much do we pay you to tell us stuff we already know?" That was the first thing she told me. And I told her, "A lot. You pay me a lot to tell you things I already know." So she just kind of kept a big wall. And I told her that day, I was like, I know you hate me now, but before I leave, we're gonna be friends. And and it did happen. I found the way to her heart was to solve very difficult problems for her organizationally. And then the boundaries started to come down, and I realized she had the trauma of many, what she would call, useless consultants come in. And so she just felt I was another one in a long line of useless consultants. And so she's like, I recognize this. I see, you know, I've seen this before, leave me alone. And so I knew the way to her heart was to actually add true, genuine value in the form of solving very difficult organizational issues. So it really depends on when I respect that boundary. Is it like a cultural thing, or is it just because for another reason? In this case, in one case, I left it, never invited him for dinner again, and then another one, I was like committed to that barrier.
That's yeah, like you say, we can't always influence it, and sometimes we think like, okay, we can, and sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose friends in a way.
Yes, exactly.
Um, that's but I recognize that, and yeah, I had a conversation with our work relation with someone that I thought was going much better in very similar situation, and in the end I realized that no, this for this person, everything asking was too close, and yeah, it really felt not good for that person, and I'm yeah, but okay, that's
Yeah.
yeah, it's I can't change all of that in for everyone, of course, and we can be friends with everyone, of course. That's the other part.
No. And
Yeah,
then we have to also recognize that by virtue of what we're trying to do, you're going to make enemies. So we are generally hired when someone's attempting to change a system, an established norm, a stable system. And so we are seen by definition as a virus, something that's that is being brought into change. And so of course the antibodies are going to go after you. And many times we are the face of the virus, right? We're this, we're the spike protein, and so, you know, uh, not everyone is going to like you. And I feel like if I do my job well, that means real change has occurred in the near term. In the short term, people cannot let, or everyone cannot like you. Maybe a couple of true believers will, but the majority of people will either not care about you, wait for you to go, or have a deep dislike. What I like to tell myself, and maybe it's a story I tell myself, that given a long period of time, they're going to see that I'm really on their side. And but there's a necessary pain of attempting to genuinely try to change something. So I don't think we can make everyone our friends, but what we can do is be authentic and uh, not duplicitous, or not, say, not an asshole. That's probably a better way. So
since I would say we're not really the virus, but more the yeah the we are the what is it, the vaccine in a way for real, sometimes real problems, but vaccines also get attacked in a way, or the body learns to attack because it
well,
helps to
I
attack
mean,
the virus.
vaccines are viruses. They're just a very small dose. you
Exactly,
know, yeah. Maybe it
and
sounds
that's
better. It's you
but
know,
it the purpose is different. I mean, the purpose of a virus is to, well, to survive and to win over the body one way or another, and the vaccines would probably, well, the goal is more to help the body conquer the viruses and things like that. But in the end, it's the same thing. It is
yeah.
a virus indeed in
Maybe
a
it's a
small
nicer way of
dose.
putting
And
it. Yeah.
mm. But I really like that. I really like that. Yeah, thinking like indeed people. It's not nice for our ego that people will not like us, but indeed our goal is not, for me, never my goal is to be liked. My goal is to help them, and just like with children, that we all, well, our goal as parents is not that our children like us. Our goal is to raise them as decent human beings, and hopefully that will result also in liking the people that raise them.
I think that's
But yeah,
that's a perfect analogy. I mean, most of what we do, especially when the children are young, is basically saying no with love, but no, you cannot have that red pill. No, you
exactly.
cannot. My son, the youngest son, was trying to eat marshmallows for dinner last night. You know,
Mm,
basically eating sugar for dinner. Now, if I wanted to be liked, I would say yes. I would say
mm,
fine. You can play your Switch until midnight, and so yes,
But
our
then
job is
the next day, everybody will be hurt because they will be
exactly.
not sleeping enough, or yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And
that's
and I always think there's a big difference and a profound difference between being loved and being liked. I
mm,
want them to love me. I don't need them to like me.
right.
And so so yeah, I always think about what's the fundamental difference between love and liking someone. And so yeah, that's a deep rabbit hole to go down to down to,
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's a nice sentence that summarizes the whole conversation we had until now.
yeah.
The difference between being liked and being loved. Let's move to that second question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, what would have become of you?
I would have been all things equal, I would have probably been, a at this point a managing director or a senior person in a financial organization. That's the trajectory I was on. That's what I wanted. That's what I thought I wanted. That's what, all my planning and scheming was moving me towards. Was, I was a director at a young age. I wanted to become a managing director. And then I had a whole plan actually written out to be a C-level technology executive in my 40s. And so if I didn't discover this world or discover certain people, actually is more important to say than agile, then I would probably just be doing that on that path.
Um, what could you still remember that first spark that triggered you to not go into that direction?
I actually remember some moments because this all started around 12, 13 years ago. So from the time I it wasn't like it happened immediately, me quitting but one of the first things was the hiring of a guy named Gordon Weir, who was one of the people I recommend you speak to. And so I was working in that bank, and the they hired a guy from another bank called Gordon Weir, and I had never met someone like him. So disruptive. He was broke any rule and every rule he wanted. And I just was so fascinated with him. Like, for example, we'd be in a meeting, there would be meetings, and he would think the meeting was interesting. He'd just walk into the meeting. He's like, this looks interesting. And he would just walk into the meeting. I'd be like, huh? Is that and he was so full of energy and enthusiasm and this vigor and this passion. And I just was like, what is this? Who is this? And he was the first time I met a change agent, like somebody who, like, you put him in and things start changing. Was so chaotic and so interesting and intriguing and always reading. And so he brought in a bunch of consultants, Craig Larman, Gojko, then eventually Dan North. This is a long time ago. This is before what they call the agile industrial complex became so big. And so there was this steady stream of consultants coming in. And so now I'm being exposed to these different unique things I've never met, these independent, very interesting consultants, everyone having their own interesting story. And so it was first Gordon and then bringing all these interesting people. And then I attended my first class, which was with Craig. And for those who don't know Craig, he's a very interesting person. I don't know what the right adjective to his training style is, but he's, let's just say he's very thought provoking, in his style. And
Best you
so
can say.
yeah, and so I'm in this class, and he's teaching basic. At this point, there was no less. It was just explaining elements of Scrum and scaling and thinking tools and Lean and all of these things. And I'd heard some of them before, but then I was asking questions, and so he was not loving my questions. And at this point, you have to think. I believe I'm a high flyer, all right? And so he's like, what is it that you do? So during the class, now my superiors are there and all this stuff. He's like, what is it that you do? So I told him what I did, and he said, wow, that sounds very wasteful, and it makes me sad. He said that job sounds like, I think he said that job sounds like pure waste, and it makes me sad. And I don't know why, that comment did not bother me at all. It just really intrigued me. Like, I wasn't offended. I don't know why I wasn't offended. I just was really intrigued by that comment. And then later I learned to understand he meant that quite thoughtfully. Like, from a lean perspective, my entire job is waste. I add no value based on his definition of value and waste. So he wasn't just saying, my life is waste or anything like that. And he said, from a value creation perspective, you cease to create value when you stop really writing code, or and so that kind of altered the way I thought. And then eventually I asked him, I was like, how do you do what you do? I asked Craig, and of course, if you know Craig, he didn't answer. He just said something like Zen and walked away. He didn't tell me. And then he eventually gave me a playbook how I could change, how I could go from this trajectory to that trajectory. And then I had another conversation with Dan North in Paddington Station in London before I quit, and I asked him also the same thing. What do you think? And he asked me a really fundamental question. He said, "Are you running? If you quit and go to this new life, are you running towards something or running away from something?" And that question, combined with sort of Craig's, really, like, am I running because I'm unhappy at work, or am I running towards something? So he told me, if you're quitting because you're running away from something, then don't do it. But if you find something compelling you're running towards, then do it. And so that's why I said it was really people, not anything having to do with agility, that shaped my following one path, which was all I knew since I was like 18, 19, to changing and going into the unknown abyss where you have to learn, like, finding clients, coaching. Like, I didn't know anything. Speaking in conferences. What's the game? Do you write a book? Do you don't write a book? How do you rate charging, incorporating? And so I left a world which was like with a known path with guardrails, and to me was very, very unknown. So yeah, so those are the moments that sort of stand out to me. Those conversations with Craig and Dan, amongst others, Gojko, etc. That sort of showed me there's an alternate way to live.
Really like that, and I really love the expression of, are you running away from something or you're running towards something? And I think that's, yeah, I've just had at the customer somebody who quit the job, and the reason he did it is because he did already for a couple of years have a startup for creating a game, and so he is already getting money from a patron and everything. So now it's the moment to say, now I want to go full-fledged into this adventure, because I know it's not just giving some kind of money. It With the
Yeah,
money that's coming in on a monthly basis, I can already make a small living, not much, but enough. And now I can fully go full in to build this game that I'm working with. And I'm so in love when people do this for this kind
yeah,
of reasons, because then it's really like, you know what you stand for, you know what you want to do. You didn't just jump in straight away. You took a path, and you took some steps in some of that. And yeah, it's not just for, oh, I don't like what I'm doing, I'll just quit and then do something else. So
exactly.
that's really wonderful. Let's move to that third question. What is your biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for you? Or at least the biggest challenge you want to put open on the internet, of course.
And so this, you mean in what I do at work, or just in general?
I on purposely don't define that, because that's for me also a different kind of diversity. Some people want to talk on personal level, some people want to talk on work, or sometimes people talk about a challenge that is almost in the past but still with them. Yeah, I leave it really rather open to you what you consider that, well, what that question triggers you, basically.
Okay, so I'll tell you because I didn't know whether to go to the professional or personal route. I'll just tell you
Mm-hmm.
what's coming to my mind and my heart now.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I st- still struggle with 10 years since going independent is how to use my downtime. The you say this thing, oh, I want to, the reason I'm doing this is spend more time with my family, with my my pursuits, etc. So now you've designed a life where you're not working all the time. Like I'm with clients, let's say a couple of months a year, where I'm actively with clients, and that produces enough money for me to live the lifestyle I want in Istanbul. So I actually don't have to work more to sustain the life I want to live. So now you have a lot, or at least I have a lot of time, and so I have sometimes suffer from productivity guilt, you know, where I feel like I should be doing more. Like I wake up, I have a completely empty calendar unless I put something in that calendar. So it's not a client gig. I have to actually put something in my calendar. Whereas I grew up in a corporation, which means your Outlook calendar gets filled all day, every day, double booked. So you can just kind of go with momentum, and you're always busy, and you go home and you've spent an entire day on meetings and stuff like that and design sessions. And so when you spend 17, 18 years of your life like that, and then all of a sudden you have now times where your entire calendar is empty and you have to choose what goes into it. That's something that I still haven't cracked, that sort of productivity guilt. Like, oh, I should be writing a book. I should be finishing my book. I should be doing X. I should be doing Y. I should be, recording a podcast. And the mental model I tried to remind myself through this challenge is this idea that Naval Ravikant, who I really adore, he said, you should be working like a lion, not like a cow. And lions spend most of the time kind of hanging out, and then every once in a while they go and they get the food for or get into a fight or whatever. Basically, these genuine sprints of activity, followed by long periods of just hanging out with the tribe. And so I need to get better at that. I need to get better at not filling my time and being more productive, but being okay with my downtime and actually enjoying this life that I've designed, or been gifted, or whatever. And so that's something I still struggle with. This non-filled uh, calendar time.
And I recognize that. I think a lot of people these days and age, it's like sitting on a couch and doing nothing is almost impossible these days because you have your phone, you have so many other things around you, and very quickly there will be, yeah, things to do that might not be even just valuable, but we have so much distractions around us.
Yeah.
And I hear from a lot of people like finding the time to just read for an hour or two. It's so hard to focus. And I used to read a lot of books, and now I notice that, yeah, it's harder. My brain wants to have dopamine shots in all kind of directions, and yeah, the value is much for me much more in taking that time in reading or in doing other kind of stuff, and it's stuff that I'm interested in, not per se the things that family or friends are doing, because everybody needs to do have their or go for their personal leisure time, and it might be something completely different that for you than for your partner or for your friends or whatever.
100%. What you're saying really resonates, because the battle against instant dopamine, it's very hard for me to beat the algorithm. The algorithm is just too good, you know, and it knows me so well. It knows not to give me mindless crap. Like it knows to give me an interview by Charlie Munger, and I love Charlie Munger, and it knows I love Charlie Munger. It knows I'll spend an hour listening to Charlie Munger, and it's smart enough to know that that will feel like what I call these constructive distractions, as opposed to destructive distractions. Destructive distractions is just empty calories, just watching some crap on Netflix, and it's very good at giving me constructive distractions. but ultimately I'm still not happy because there's things I want to do. There's things, ideas I want to work on. Like this last pattern I mentioned, I've been working on it for a very long time. Written a lot about it, but I just need to get it over the finishing line. And that's probably the second biggest thing that drives me crazy is I'm full of ideas. Like, because I see things in companies, I get excited, I see patterns, and then I work on them, and I think this could be useful for the community. I am very good at taking many ideas to almost the finish line. Like I don't do the final thing. I don't do the final just publish it, and that could be imposter syndrome, it could be for whatever reason. And so using my time wisely or accepting I'm not going to use it, whichever one is better, plus just finishing the things I'm working on are probably the two biggest personal obstacles that drive me crazy.
Recognize that, and indeed, and that doesn't mean that sometimes it's okay to watch that whatever Netflix show or whatever others, but it's I liked what you said in the somewhere near the end, like it's the decision. You decide, okay, what kind of thing I want to do. Is that just the mindless viewing of something that might be okay because sometimes we might need that, or is it more working on that thing that brings some value, or maybe dropping because yeah, it's the 10,000 ID, and I prefer to finish something over adding some more IDs. Let's and talking about
The
yeah,
way yeah,
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, please go ahead. No, I
Well,
was
I
going to
wanted to
say
move
quickly
to yeah, go ahead, what you
no,
wanted to.
please move. Please go.
It's yeah, I wanted to because we're spending already a long time and
Yeah.
trying
Oh,
to
okay,
do
okay.
just a
Go
couple
for
of
it.
things, but I have the feeling that this is the exact way to move to that next question: what drives you? Because when you say you have 10,000 IDs, and I feel it here in this conversation as well, we talk a lot about a lot of these things, so there's a lot of passion, there's a lot there. Do you know where that drive, where that passion is coming from?
No, I I thought about this question. I don't know where it comes from, and is it nurture or nature? You know, I see a lot in my father. That's what makes me think it's nature. That like my father's visiting me in Istanbul, and I see he's very passionate about many ideas, and he's full of charisma. Like he's so much cooler than I am, and I think really the source of the well is probably him, if I'm to be honest, not something of my own doing. And so, yeah, I'd have to give him credit for a lot of most of my good, and maybe some of my not finishing and things like that. And so I think, yeah, I mean, that's, if I'm to be genuine, it's not my own doing. It's something that I was lucky enough to have him as a father and his genetics.
So you recognize that with your father that was the same thing, a lot of passion, a lot of drive, and that inspired you. Is that a way to say it? Because it could still be nurture or nature. Is that something that you looked up to when you were young, or
Yeah, I mean, he's just was a very awesome figure, and he actually still is. And so, yeah, I looked up to him and wanted to be like him, and in many ways am like him. And people that have known him when he was my age say, "Wow, you're just a lot like him." And so I can't take credit for a lot of the good things. A lot of it does come from him, and how he is and how he continues to be and the example he sets. And the other thing is, I'm lucky enough, for whatever reason, that I'm working on things I like. Like I really am fascinated with behavior change. It's not just, and I like, it's just so interesting to me. Like how nations change culture, how companies change culture. Like I will sit there and study and read all the things I can about, for example, like Satya. How did Satya change Microsoft? Like it's so interesting to me. Like everyone is focusing on Elon. I'm much more interested in Satya and how he went in and changed and established successful culture. And so a lot of these ideas also are truly interesting to me. Now, if you were to give me an idea I'm not interested in, you'll see a very different side of me. You'll be like, I'll be trying to end this conversation very. You'll see it in my body language, and so it's a combination of, I think, my father, or a lot of it is my father, plus working in a field that I naturally find very interesting, which is ultimately culture change. I mean, it's not agile, it's not. I mean, what is agile? It's trying to change culture. It's trying to change behaviors, which is ultimately trying to change culture, trying to stop bad negative behaviors. And I really, that's how I think about myself. Like I think of myself as like defects in my software, again through nature and nurture. It's the job of my life to sort of debug those defects, and I see the same thing in organizations. To me, it's like super fascinating.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. The debugging of ourself and changing, and definitely, yeah. The let's not go too much into Elon Musk, because I think that's a different kind of rabbit hole where
Okay, no
I'm not
problem.
sure I want to go to. But yeah, I do agree. It's all about changing culture, and both people that you mentioned have been changing culture. We might like it or we might dislike it, but they have been changing cultures in the companies that they joined, and that is indeed something to look up to, or look down to if you don't like what they've done or what's resulted in doing. But yeah, I want to bring it back also to well, your father, where you say, okay, that's a man that I looked up to. I saw things, and then that inspired me to do things in my way, because I can imagine that it's not always the exact same way, but still being inspired in a way. And I want to then go to that next question, that with all that drive, with all that passion, and with all that inspiration, what do you consider your biggest achievement that you had?
Probably leaving the safety of my job and my career path. That's probably, I think, the single biggest achievement. Like every time when you ask, when I read the question, I was like, okay, kids. You have your standard answers. Kids, or this gig, or this transformation, and you know the kids. I cannot take credit for that, really, and the homeschooling is mostly their mom with my help. And so I can't, unfortunately, take credit for the kids or how they turned out. I was like a supporting role there. The one I can is the decision to leave the safety of my job, and one that I was in since I was like I said, 18, 19. I don't even remember. I was a sophomore in college when I started working full time as in the bank. And so making the decision to leave is probably and then go into the unknown. Like I said, I enumerate a bunch of things. When you go from a very standard career path, although it's very difficult, to the unknown of starting your own thing and clients and all of the things that come with what we do, that's probably my greatest achievement, and the one that has paid the most dividends, and giving me the sporadic.
But yeah, I really like that answer, because it's indeed something that a lot of people struggle with, especially after a number of years in a company. You see the trajectory, you see until where you can go, and you know that kind of safety net, gold handcuffs, whatever you want to call it, but there is some kind of thing about, okay, this is what your career will become, and if you leave, there is basically nothing that's for sure. And doing that is very scary. It is, or it was for you, very rewarding, and I think for many people, when they dare to do it, it is rewarding, but it's very scary at the same time.
100%.
So when you do it, and then you then succeed to, well, because I know a couple that then went back, because they said, like, okay, it's that other life is not for me, and that there's no shame in that. At least they tried, and that's also something good. But if you can do that and then figure out a different kind of life, that's definitely something to be proud of. So yeah, that is something. Um, and if you will look back, maybe to that moment that you were making that decision, uh, would there be any advice that you would have for your younger version of you?
Oh, wow. I would probably tell myself that, okay, I'll give you a nice one and I'll give you a controversial one. Um, a nice one would be, or less controversial, it's not nice, is that don't don't having one great client make you lazy. That can end in a second. And so you might have a client that you think is just printing money for you. They love you, you love them, they're giving you a lot of money, and that makes you effectively lazy in not progressing your ideas, getting your ideas out there, speaking, meeting other people, basically prospecting, generating leads, everything that's required in sales. Because when you're sort of an independent, you're you're your own salesperson, and you're the team, and you're the post, support. You're everything, and so you have to never stop the sales process, even if you have a great client printing money, and and by printing money, I mean, like, it looks like it's a very long term gig. I would tell myself not to allow that to make you lazy, because I paid the price for that. A client that loves you until something happens, that senior leader, who effectively usually is a senior leader, just somebody who really likes you and trusts you and who's bringing you in, and they can go to another company, they can, or the company can decide there's no more budget and there's budget cuts and no more consultants, etc. So that's probably the non-controversial advice to myself. The more controversial advice would be, the colleagues that you thought are your friends are also your competition, and there's unfortunately a scarcity mentality, uh, not of everyone, but a general scarcity mentality that pervades this world that we swim in. And so the agile world, or whatever world we're in, whatever we want to call it, seems very nice on the surface. Uh, and people can be very, and everyone, yeah, it is nice, but it's not they're not your friends a lot of time. They're your actual competition. And times when there's scarcity, or this sense of scarcity, people are not working together to try to make the pie better. They're trying to get their piece of the pie. And so there was a lot of growing up I had to do in terms of people. And so, yeah, those are the sort of the two lessons I would tell myself, if I was to go back.
Part about the scarcity mentality. For me, there is a lot of been changed in the community since we started like 20 years ago. Like that, what we used to have, what Chris Matz calls the community of of yeah of needs, where we were looking for things, and now there's much more. I hope I didn't switch them around, but there's more the community of solutions, where people have a solution and they try to sell to people. And I recognize, so a lot of that things have been shifted. Before we were looking together for solutions, and or yeah, how could we make things, and not so much in trying to sell ourselves and to be outsmarting people. So definitely recognize a lot of that. Um, and yeah, there have been people in my past that I was very open about talking, and then hearing later on that they tried to go beyond my back to get the same job I was talking about, and like, well, okay, I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
So the at the same time, I'm like, I actually told Chris a couple of, yeah, some time ago, that for me it just encouraged me to create more ideas and not so much to guard more of these, because yeah, if people want to steal my ideas, which has happened in the past, yeah, I don't want to worry too much because then I'm in the negative space and I'm into too much.
Yeah.
But I know that for a lot of people, it's not that easy. And indeed, creating community and sharing ideas takes a lot of energy. And when you see people abusing them and sometimes, yeah, getting bigger, it can be frustrating. I
Yeah.
can recognize that.
Yeah. I mean, I think on average, most of the people I've met are good, and actually, I think everyone in their minds is good, but the but I think it's a function of scale as well. Like if you look at the early small talk days, or even the early Linux days, it's like really genuine community trying to create great open source software. But as you get more people and you scale, and the more commercially minded people, it's just a function of scale. And I don't want to say it brought me down. I just said I acted in very naive ways, that that I am more wise now than I was when I first started 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I don't want, indeed, I definitely agree that there is more nice people, and even the people that try to steal things or did steal things from me, and they might have their own reasons that for wanting to do some of that, and that's also why I don't want to spend too much time in the negative space with them. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll just do something else, create more IDs, because I know if I can actually just a little bit like what you said before, take that time to relax and take time for myself, there actually will be much more ideas coming because I know that there is a lot there. That's
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, and just to close this idea off, one of my guiding lessons from my father that really has shaped what I think is that ultimately he never thought his job was important. He was never defined by career, although he was successful. He always told me, "It's like your job is just seems to be one facet. Don't take it too seriously." You know, he's like, none of my friends at work, like basically, it's just really endured with the exception of one or two or something like that. He's like, do not allow yourself to be defined by your work. Don't take it too seriously. Treat it as a game, and it should be just a small facet of your life. And so, a lot those sort of guiding principles from him have also kind of I don't get that worked up about work, although I like what I do.
The more we like what we do, it feels less work, but at the same time, it's not the only thing that defines us. I think that's like we
Yeah,
said before. There's so many other things, and that might be yeah. Because if the more that becomes defines ourselves, the less time we take to actually do nothing. And well, like we
exactly.
said earlier on, let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
Um, I we talked about behaviors. I think the thing that I think about the most in terms of agility, and I don't think about it in terms of like personal Kanban or a Scrum board in your office, or I don't think I think that's probably the least interesting thing to me about what we do, the sort of the process aspects, is recognizing and removing waste from my life is probably the most probably the thing that I think about the most. Like, what do I define as waste in my life and in my family's life? What are necessary, like what do I define value? Because when you talk about from a lean perspective, value and waste, and necessary waste, unnecessary waste, that you have to start by defining value. Like, what is value? And so even that question from a personal perspective, what is it that is a value added activity that I can do? And what is value? How do I define value? And then on the flip side, what's necessary and unnecessary waste? And then seeing, when I look back at 2024, how much time did I spend in each of the three buckets in a value added activity? And that could be, for example, the creation of something. That could be a value added activity. The creation of an artifact. You're creating this podcast. That could be a value added activity. What's a necessary waste that I have to do, and taxes probably a necessary waste, and then what's an unnecessary waste, and then I spend what's the proportion I use of each, and I ask my wife these things, which how much do I spend, and so probably the thing from lean or from our world that I personally think about and I would suggest is looking at your life in those three dimensions, and then asking yourself like, okay, 2024, how much did I spend in the unnecessary waste? Because that is probably, you asked the question before, let me answer it now. Now I'm thinking the thing that scares me personally the most is wasting my life, like wasting the time I have and the health I have and the energy I have and the money I've acquired, like wasting it. And so, okay, so then how do I define waste? you know, because you can easily say, I don't want to waste my life. Okay, how do you define waste? And what's a value added activity? And so looking at my time from that dimension of value added activity versus uh, necessary waste, and then trying very hard to remove the unnecessary waste in my life to make way for the value added activity. And I'm more concerned in general with removing unnecessary waste than adding value added activity. Like I'm trying to create the space for that. And so that's probably I don't know if it's a productivity tip or agile tip. It's just what I think about.
Well, this is why again I don't define the exact what is agile tip or what not. I think this is why I like to ask that question as broadly as possible, because it brings the things that are well important, and having and I think not enough people think about what does value mean, what is waste, and sometimes we feel that we have to do it, and sometimes, yeah, for many people paying taxes might feel waste. But if I live in Belgium, where well we actually pay a lot of taxes, and it's not that I'm really happy with it, but I also see some of the value that we get in return for it. And if I compare it to other countries where it's a lot less taxes, but they also get a lot less value for that, like, okay, um, we can discuss if our government should do also less wasteful things and use that money in other kind of ways. That's a whole different kind of discussion. But for me, yeah, I see value in some of the things where I pay money for, and I prefer to
Yeah.
look for places where indeed I can remove the waste. And again, waste is different for everybody. I don't like watching television, and I consider that for me a waste, because I like to much more spend time learning things and reading things, or working on my podcast or whatever. And others might say like, oh, wait a minute, after my day, I need that television. There is no value difference there. But please don't make
Yeah.
me join your things that you like to work on, where I might not want to do that. So that's a
Exactly.
totally different kind of thing. Okay, let's move to that next question on remote working. What have you learned about remote working?
I think probably the biggest lesson I learned in terms of remote working is, again, a lesson I learned from how my kids learn. They've been homeschooled. They don't sit in front of Zoom all day. It's actually laughable. Like they almost never sit in front of Zoom screens. And so what I learned from watching remote workers during COVID is they took a modality, like, okay, we're in and we're just going to switch it to Zoom. So something that works in person, I'm going to switch it without thinking about it from first principles, and we're just going to have people sit in front of Zoom screens all day. Um, which is, again, if you homeschool your kids, they almost never sit in front of Zoom screens. Their day is completely structured differently. And so probably the first lesson I learned in remote working is don't copy what happens when you're in the office at home. That's actually, uh,
Right.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work, and the opposite, it sucks. Like you can literally sit at your desk and in front of kind of screen, and so work. You have to reshape how you work or how we train or how we deliver workshops based on the tools. And so my kids never sit in front of Zoom screens. It's very, very rare that they do that. And so that's probably the first lesson I learned is don't copy a modality, don't copy a way that works in one modality into another. You have to rethink Okay, here are the tools, here are the constraints. How can we make this a better learning experience? Does the training class have to be 8 hours of people sitting on their screen? Does that make sense? And so it's probably rethinking how you deliver work. And I think a lot can be borrowed um, from the open source world, who's been doing that for a very, very long time and successfully. How do they work? What's the schedule? What's the processes they follow? Do they follow the same 8-hour days? Does that even make sense? And so I feel like there's a general failure of imagination. Just take what worked when you're in the office and try to adopt it at home.
I recognize, and I think it's the same can be said for agile transformations. Then they say, okay, that works somewhere else. Let's just adapt it and copy paste it, and without too much adaptations, that doesn't work. And so many different kind of things. Um, what worked with one friendship or with one friend doesn't work with another friend. I mean, we just need to adapt in a way we learned, and I think that's so much a valuable thing. And we learn so much things in a certain environment, and then when we go to another environment, yeah, unfortunately we have to relearn because of the experience. It might go faster, but we still have to relearn some things, and I think that's really is important to, yeah, to recognize for people. I really like that. Let's move to a question that we already partially answered. What's a book you have read? And well, we talked already about that first book. Let's focus on the second book. What was that second book that you wanted to bring?
It was, remember I talked about when I was switching over from corporate world into consulting. One suggestion that one of the agile coaches gave me was The Secrets of Consulting by
From
Gerald
Jerry
Weinberg.
Weinberg, exactly.
Yeah.
This is the Leanpub
And
version. Yeah, go ahead.
amazing, and like so much, because he's like the consultant's consultant, at least in our world, in the sort of technology world, and distilling his ideas and experience into a very small book and set of laws, and the laws of raspberry jam, and it really was like, okay, it's like a treasure trove. Like I'm starting, he's done, in terms of now he's like distilling his wisdom and then sort of handing it off to me. And so to me it was hugely valuable, down to what you should promise, how you should promise, even one of his laws is whatever they tell you, it's always a people problem. No, despite what they tell you, it's always a people problem. It's not a technical problem, it's not an engineering problem, it's not, it's always a people problem. And so it was almost like upgrading my software very quickly before I became a consultant. So I took a download matrix style. And so that book was hugely influential, um, and shaped how I thought about consulting, how I viewed myself, how I priced myself, how what I promised a client, how much improvement I would promise, including his ideas around how he views human behavior to work, even his idea of don't solve a client's problem. Because sometimes I used to, like, people call me, I'd solve their problem for them or attempt to, and he would say, no, don't do that. Do not pay. Do not solve the problem unless they pay, which was counterintuitive to me. And so that was a really impactful book on me.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I've been one of the people, or one. I've been lucky enough to be at two really wonderful trainings. The AYE training. I forgot what it stands for, and then problem solving leadership training with him, and where he does give some internal coaching on in between the sessions. So I was really lucky to do that,
Yeah.
and the influence that he had on me was tremendous. This book and many of the others, because I think he wrote 60 books or something like that. Not everything about IT, some fiction books as well, but I think the non-fiction ones, I'm sure I didn't read all of them, but every one of them that I read, I was so valuable. So much yeah, wisdom
Yeah.
indeed, like you say. He's giving it, and you can learn from doing that. And what you just said, that at the end there, the whatever they tell you, it's always a people problem. That is so true. And I think I've said it, I don't know, not so long ago, when I was talking with people, and then people afterwards ask me, okay, what seems to be the problem? And I just use that quote as like, it's it's not like it doesn't matter what they tell you, but you know that it's much more than what they tell you.
Yeah.
And of course, what they tell you is the entrance, and it's important to listen and to understand them. But in the end, it will be a people problem. That's it's yeah. In So far has always been right. So yeah, it's although at the same time, systems can break good people as well, and we need to find, okay, who were then the people who designed that system, and how can we work in, and what are the incentives that make people go into one direction or the other. A really wonderful book as well, indeed. So let's move to, for me, one of the most interesting questions, and that's the question: what question you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
Um, Probably how does one define success in a coaching engagement? I always thought that's like an interesting question.
Yes.
Um,
So how do you define it, or how? Yeah.
I used to have like very sort of altruistic answers, like about people and happiness and things like that. Now I define it a little bit differently. I define it, do I help the customer achieve their commercial objectives? So the exact opposite of how I used to answer this question about people and happiness and things like that. It's, you know, did I define a commercial objective or a real strategic objective with the client, and did the work I do help them actually achieve those objectives? And the second part, within certain constraints, like did I define constraints that represent my value system? Like, we're going to help you achieve your objectives without screwing over people, making life difficult, quality, etc. And so where I got that from was, if I hire a marathon coach and he's really great and I don't run the marathon, then he's not successful. you know, if I hire a fitness coach and don't lose any weight, then okay, or I didn't lose any weight, then ultimately he didn't succeed in the goal. And so I started thinking about it. The more I thought about the coaches I hire in my life, I care about the outcome ultimately, not the friendship that we foster. And so I was like, okay, so what's the equivalent of my clients running a marathon or within a certain time, or losing weight or winning a championship? Like that's how football coaches get rewarded. It's not about the process they put in. you know Jose Mourinho is rewarded if he wins, not what new football running process he puts in. And so it's no longer process goals, happiness goals, that kind of thing. Those become, some of those are constraints for me, like the happiness of the people that, like, I will refuse to work in a way that people become miserable. And I think, like, even when I saw sort of your instant reaction to Elon, I can kind of read between the lines. But I do believe that helping the customers achieve sort of their strategic commercial objectives, understanding what they are, helping them move the needle on that, while defining very strong constraints around, people and other things. That to me is how I define success.
And I believe that, and at the same time, I notice also how difficult it is for clients, and just for myself. If I look at myself when I work with coaches, that it is really hard to define upfront, where do I want to go. So how do you deal with that?
Most of my work now has sort of grown as I worked with different clients in different regions, not just in terms of process or adopting a methodology. That's like a very small part of what I do now. It's a lot of it starts with strategy and what is your strategy and defining your strategy, whether it's at the department, at the company level. And so I have a unique position to actually define what that success looks like, or help them define what that success looks like, and define what that sort of ultimate goal is and what the interim goals are. So I'm now part of that process. But if I'm not part of that process, it's multiple conversations with basically the person that brought me in. What specifically does success look like for you by the end of next year? Like what does winning look like for you? Because winning, sometimes coaches put in their own what they view winning is. Oh, people are gonna be happy, reduce suffering, etc. That's, again, that's hubris. That's what you think. Really, what is winning for them? Can you help them define it? And maybe that's the beginning of the coaching engagement. And then my job is to increase the likelihood of that happening. And so it's no longer I am successful if I implement a set of ideas that I'm bringing. It's like, I love that Chris Matson. He's great, by the way. It's about it's not about solutions. It's not about community of solutions. The community, like, understanding their needs, helping them to define their needs, and then helping them to achieve those needs. And so that's how I now define success, and it's a constantly shifting thing as I grow and mature and work in different companies.
I like it. Um, it's and indeed, when I can work with a client to go and that, and indeed help them, and like you said, when yeah, the number of times that a client calls me up or sends an email or whatever, says, Eve, I want to do agile by the book. It's always like, okay, first of all, let's start with what book, because there's like 60 books behind me that talk about some kind of version of agile. But even there, is that really what you want? Do you want to have that book, or do you want to have a book that is written for your company? Again, coming back to the copy pasting that we talked about before. Um, but sometimes that's really hard for them to define. What does it mean? And in terms of companies, that is easier to do. When I work with my personal coaches, it's sometimes hard to say, okay, what does that mean for me? What is that thing that I want to focus on this time with my coaches? I find that a lot harder, because there is no so much. Yeah, it's different, like with a fitness coach or with other kind of thing, because there's a goal. Like you say, if you want to run a marathon, the goal is to reach that marathon. If you want to have, I don't know, win, be the first of the be the with an Olympic gold medal, that's very clear as a goal, even if it's 4 years into the making, or 10 years into the making. Um, but sometimes it's harder when it's on personal level. How do you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
better at these kind of things? Because it ultimately goes back to, how do you measure what is success, and that is not always that
No,
easy,
so
of
it's not
course.
easy. No.
Um, I want to move to that next question, especially because I know you have a lot of people in mind. So, who are the people that you think I should ask next? So, you gave me, I think, four names of four links that you had.
Yeah.
Um,
So let me just introduce the
right.
category of people,
Okay.
because we've talked about different coaches and thought leaders already today. Chris and Dan and Craig and and others. And there's a long list of awesome people that I absolutely love. Tobias, Alistair. People have sort of shaped me in some ways, but the list of people are not those. Not the coaches, which is sort of the traditional. What impressed me more than than sort of our class of people, the coaches, are leaders that actually s- created change in their organization, right? Actually created change. And they're not necessarily agile coaches, but they had the courage to sometimes great risk to themselves introduce a change in their organization. And so I gave you some of those names. I already mentioned Gordon Weir, who's just an awesome human, awesome person, genuinely sort of a change
I think
agent.
that's him. Am I
That's
correct?
it. That's him. Yeah. Just like a change agent through and through. You know, and in many ways, I credit him for starting me down this path, showing me you can just walk into a meeting room, you can be disruptive in a positive way. Um, and so he's a person that I really recommend that you speak to. Um, Another, hold on one second. Eunice, give me 5 minutes. I know, you just have to wait 5 minutes. I have to wait. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Just wait. Wait. Please forgive me.
It's
Uh,
this is also what I like about doing the podcast. We can do it from home, and sometimes home interrupts. So yeah,
yeah, okay, so he's
let's
like,
let's move to
yeah,
the.
let's move forward. The next person I gave you was, who was it, or should I just, was it
I'll just
Jill?
show
Yeah, yeah,
people. So this is,
yeah.
who's
This is
this?
Jill. This is Jill Jensen. So she's a senior leader at a major bank, and she's somebody who really tries to transform every organization I've seen for the better. Like every organization that sort of I've dealt with, she's always tried to transform it from the better, but she's always sort of led from doing the right thing and putting people first, and so she creates this sort of positive momentum of change, and she's able to create, and we hear a lot of times this idea of like creating safety. She's has this unique mixture of, she's so caring, so hardworking, so passionate about change, that she does create this like really wonderful environment. And so working with her has been like really rewarding, or seeing her in action rather. And so she's a senior leader. And there's one thing I should say about senior leaders. Many times they're incentivized not to change, or to engage in what's called change theater, to look like you're changing without actually changing. And so she's been a very special leader who's actually made change by creating an environment of safety and putting really people first, and giving them time, and removing that sort of fear to the extent that you can, because there's always fear when it comes to change. And so um
So we just talked
yeah,
about Jill. Let's
yeah.
start. Let's bring that next person. So who is this?
So this is a guy named Lee Nichols, and he was, I mentioned Gordon, he was sort of the senior leader that decided they're going to enable this entire change, right? And the reason that I think, again, he's somebody that drove change. But what I like about Lee and what he taught me is that he's one of the most thoughtful leaders when it comes to change. He takes time to learn the theory, and then he has the guts to actually try it. He's just a very thoughtful leader. Whether he's like studying the theory of constraints or systems thinking. And so if Jill taught me to lead with heart and people and passion, Lee's almost sort of the, he's one of the most sort of thoughtful people when it comes to actually change, and what's the right amount of change, how to think about change, and then the thing that they both share is the guts to actually attempt to change, again at great risk for themselves. So we don't actually, as coaches, we don't bear a lot of the risks, other than they won't hire us again. It's the senior leader that decides to undergo the change that bears the majority of the risk. And so I have a huge amount of respect for those who attempt to change something. So Lee is someone really worth talking to.
This is really why I like other people inviting, because that indeed will bring different kind of people. And like you say, yeah, doing it is a whole different than coaching. And this is why what I think is indeed where the big risk and also the big value is, because they can make these changes. They can do it much better than we can, but they have to stay with the risks as well. We as coaches, we might be gone already to another client when the real struggles begin and or the real advantages. But that's
Exactly.
where indeed a lot of that is. And there was a fourth person. Unfortunately, I didn't find a picture on LinkedIn, so I just had his name.
So Graham is there's a lot you can say about Graham, but like he's no matter where you place him or where he gets put, he has to improve that place. He has to drive it forward. He's just infectious with his energy around how to drive, to improve things. Even if things are good, they can always get better. Like you just kind of put him in there and things have to get better. He has to develop a strategy, he has to drive the organization, he has to look at the organizational design and move things forward. He'll question everything, question every constraint. He's if you want to change an org, like he's like the senior leader for you. Like he creates that positive disruption, creates a story, and what he does really well that a lot of coaches sometimes don't do well is he knows how to commercialize that story. Like he knows how to speak in the language of the business. Like if we do this, if we do A, you're gonna get B. And so he can sometimes transform a lot of our language that is very strange to people, the agile language, stories and team names and complexity theory and all this kind of stuff. But he's very good at distilling it into the benefit of doing it. And so he's just pure energy, pure questioning everything, pure um driving change and improving. Like nothing's ever good enough, and even if you get to that point, why can't we do it faster? If we were going production, the lead time was 6 months and now we're down to a month, why can't we make it 2 weeks? If it's 2 weeks, why can't we make it 1 week? If it's 1 week, why can't we go multiple times a day? He's just insatiable about improving things. And the common thing, all of those people I mentioned, whether it's Gordon, Jill, Lee, Graham, and there's so many others, is they all want genuine change, which is us as change agents. That's all we want, to work with people who actually want to change, not to give the appearance of change. And they're all very good people, like very, very good human beings.
Yeah, thank you for bringing these people, because that's yeah, is what I'm looking for finding people who are doing the work is actually even more interesting indeed than some of the big names. For me, the goal with the podcast was finding, yeah, a lot of diversity, and it's interesting and good to hear the stories from some of the bigger names in the agile community, because it gives them some insight in how they work. But I'm as much interested to learn about the other people that are much lesser known but are actually making changes as well in our industry. Let's put it like that. So I really can't thank you enough for the time that we spent. It's yeah, we're spending it in a Christmas period, in holiday period. You talked about you want to be very careful where you spend your time. So that spending 2 hours with me in an afternoon is really wonderful. If people, Ahmed, want to get to know you and get to contact you more, what would be a good way for them to contact you?
um I think like subscribing to my newsletter is one good way. It's something that I spend a long time writing, and there's no call to action. Like I'm not gonna sell you on anything. It just represents what I'm interested learning in all aspects of my life, whether organizations, designs, the future of work, fitness, life hacks. That's a really good way to sort of keep in touch with me. And then I love when people respond to my newsletter. I send it almost every month, and it takes me like 2 weeks to write. It's something it's not just a standard newsletter. LinkedIn is fine. My email is fine. I
That is
love
the
to hear.
LinkedIn thing, and indeed, I will add your website, which is your
Yeah,
first name last name.com,
yeah.
where people can find the newsletter. I will add it to the show notes as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Well, thank you for your
No.
time. It's
And
been
thank
really
you for
wonderful
everything
to
that you
spend.
do. Honestly, thank you for everything, and your consistency is really inspiring. It's
Thank you.
really, really inspiring. All right, take
Well,
care.
I'll let you go back to your family, and
All
because
right.
your son really needs you, I think now.
he
Okay,
wants to
see
drink. He
you.
wants to drink. So anyway, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank
See
you
ya.
for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.